Welcome. My name is Tim Knox. I have the honour to be the Director of the Centre for Policy Studies. Thank you, Jesse. We're delighted to be hosting an event on how to encourage superfast broadband for all. It's a subject which is very much like housing in many ways. It's something which I think everyone agrees is much needed, but equally everyone finds it very difficult to actually get anything done. So to have such a distinguished panel this afternoon is a fantastic thing. Each speaker will speak for about 5 or 8 minutes, and then we'll take some questions from the floor. Matt Warman is MP for Boston and Skegness, newly elected. He's already the chair of the All-Parliamentary Group on Broadband and was previously technology editor of the Daily Telegraph. Matt.
Hello, thank you. Now, I have to start off by apologising for saying that I've got to dash off after about half an hour. It's not that I have lost interest in the remainder of the panel, and I think it's marvellous that we are all here competing against Boris Johnson, who is speaking in the main hall as we speak. This is a demonstration of how important broadband is in London as well. I think what we've just about got to the stage at now, after years and years of banging on about broadband, is that people get that it is a utility. We've already finally now got BT connecting fibre connections up to houses that don't even have mains gas. That is how important this is. What we haven't got is a consistent programme in any sense. So the final 5%, the final 10%, however you want to measure it, that goes beyond the current programme, is firstly not 1 in 10 houses spread evenly across the country. It's huge numbers of small communities that are being cut off from the modern economy, that are being left behind. So we have a widening and deepening digital divide, and what that means for those communities is simply not being a part of 21st century government, not being a part of 21st century entertainment, not being a part of the 21st century economy. And so how do we fix that? And part of it is about political pressure. Part of it is about saying, how do we make the various players, whether it is Virgin, BT, TalkTalk, Sky, satellite broadband, whatever, part of it is about applying pressure to those guys that says what can government do to facilitate the widest possible commercially viable rollout, and what can any government do to make sure that rollout goes as far as possible commercially, and then goes as far as possible supported by the state. And what we know more than anything else is we haven't done it well enough in the previous 2 phases to keep people happy in terms of knowing where they are in that rollout. So for me, the main thing that government should be doing is pushing harder and harder and harder for more and more transparency on where the rollout goes, when it gets where, and how we can encourage BT, county councils, all of the people that are involved to be more open about who gets what when. Because I feel that when a constituent comes to me and says, why haven't I got broadband? Why is it terrible? Why am I paying X pounds a month, X £100 a year for a service that is a disaster? They are happier if I say to them, well, you are going to get it in 18 months' time, or actually you're definitely not going to get it. So you are in a position now to go and say, well, I will sign up with that satellite broadband provider, or I will sign up with whatever innovative niche provider it is that is able to tackle these really challenging solutions. What they're desperately unhappy with is a sort of what sounds like a really political answer, which is, well, there is a national programme and we're spending 1 point whatever billion pounds it is, and broadband will be getting better and better and better. And it's like, well, what about me? Is all the constituent quite reasonably think. So in a weird way, it's in our interest to give people bad news rather than no news. And I think that is probably true in more political cases than we think, but I think it's particularly true when it comes to broadband, because it allows people to get on and sort out some of their own problems. So in terms of the title of the panel, is a broken market hurting the economy? Well, we know it is. But it's what can we do about it that matters. And for me, what we can do about it is push for greater transparency, put the money in where it is needed, but ultimately it is the transparency that will solve a huge number of those issues, because it is that that will allow people to unlock their own futures rather than sit waiting endlessly for someone to connect a broadband cable that may never actually be in anyone's pipeline. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Lee, next speaker, is Head of Policy at the Countryside Alliance. Obviously, she has campaigned strongly for improving broadband and mobile phone coverage in rural areas. Sarah.
Thank you today for the Centre for Policy for inviting to speak and Tim for chairing this important debate. You mentioned in your introduction that superfast broadband is an essential service, and this is something we totally agree with, and we put it right up there with water, electricity and gas. So it's absolutely crucial in understanding this discussion and the need for action today. Research from the Countryside Alliance has shown that 82% of rural people believe superfast broadband is essential to the 21st century, but 56% feel the government's not doing enough to ensure that everyone has access. So considering Ofcom's current digital review into the market and the government pronouncements about connecting more than 3 million homes and businesses to the internet, and the title of today's Fringe, Do You Have Superfast Broadband and Is the Market Hurting Business Connectivity, is very topical. So let's start with, are you connected to superfast broadband? In the countryside, I think we all know that broadband access is just as essential, but nowhere near as available as it is in urban areas. Both broadband and mobile coverage are patchy, and as Matt outlined, it's not just about one or two houses. We have pockets where to about 5%, in some communities it's up to 40 or 50% that are not connected. This is now unacceptable. We need to change that. So fundamentally, life in a digital age does not extend to the countryside. We did some polling before the election, asking people, what technological improvement is going to improve the UK economy. 80% of adults agreed that this was going to be superfast broadband, rising to 85% in rural communities. This was higher than investing in renewable energies into transport infrastructure such as HS2, Crossrail, third runway at Heathrow. This just shows how important and how passionate people feel about broadband connectivity. The UK is leading the world. 12% of our GDP is generated through the internet. That is number one across the world. That's amazing, and we really got to support that. SMEs utilising the internet have more than double the total export revenues compared to other SMEs. The internet is responsible for creating 2.6 jobs for every one made obsolete. So it's clear that connectivity delivers economic productivity. But we all know the lack of broadband provision in the rural areas is holding back the countryside economically, limiting the growth of start-up and small and medium-sized businesses, and failing to deliver the key government policy to increase the use of online resources. What we need to do, though, is think about this, because the countryside needs not only fast broadband, but reliable broadband. So all these talk about, we're going to have 100 megabits, we have gigabits, is no good if you have patchy and unreliable broadband. The government has promised through its BDUK project that 95% of UK promises will have superfast broadband by 2017 and a rollout of 4G services. However, this still leaves over 1.3 million homes without superfast broadband or phone signal. Ofcom research has shown that households need around 10 megabits to use video streaming or other online services, but 8% of UK households cannot currently access these speeds. So we clearly need to ensure connectivity in hard-to-reach areas. We believe we should not just rely on fixed-line broadband, but embracing all technologies. This includes mobile phone and satellite. So the Countryside Alliance has always supported expansion of alternative technologies and continues to campaign for the rollout of mobile signal coverage to support the broadband network. This is why the innovative schemes, such as those outlined in the budget earlier this year, to provide better services through support for satellite and the extension of the Super Connected Cities Voucher Scheme, are a great stride forward, but must be delivered soon, particularly for those in the hardest to reach areas and homes and businesses who are outside the BDUK project. But as ever, the question is when. Schemes such as the Super Connected Cities need to be expanded to rural businesses and communities and need to embrace all technologies to be truly effective in closing the digital divide. When it comes to talking about the broken market, the Countryside Alliance is very much pro-competition and believes end-to-end competition should be maintained where it's effective and sustainable. But that must include delivering connectivity to the countryside and those hard-to-reach areas. So by ensuring we have a competitive broadband market, which is not based on just one technology and provides households and businesses with a choice of connectivity, we can all benefit economically. So it's right and timely that Ofcom, through its digital review, are looking into the relationship between BT and Openreach. Whatever the outcome of this review, our plea to Ofcom is to place customers at the heart of their decision-making process, as it is vital at the end of a competitive market that delivers modern digital services and the infrastructure Britain desperately needs. However, it's going to take several years to separate BT and Openreach if that is the outcome of this review. But I'm concerned the debate about separation should not distract us all from the rollout of broadband to those communities which are receiving a poor level of service and who need connectivity now. We have always said that the government broadband policy in this country is not ambitious enough to meet the demand of consumers and businesses, and the current policy also lacks a vision for delivering fit-for-purpose broadband and is responsive to user needs and future-proofed in line with technology. So there needs to be a comprehensive review of broadband policy, including measures to encourage a more competitive between packages for domestic and business broadband use, a minimum of 50 megabit speed for all premises by UK by 2018-19, and there needs to be a prioritisation of fibre optic rollout to business parks and enterprise zones. More research is also needed to identify those areas affected by worst and poor access to broadband. It comes back to Matt's point about transparency. We need to be honest with people. Are you going to get broadband or are you not? Give them the choice about how they can get connected. So in conclusion, we're all ambitious for a digital Britain and the benefit it brings, but we need to work together to ensure that everyone has superfast broadband. We need a market which is fair, drives innovation, is transparent, and to ensure we all part of this digital revolution. You know, the internet is the future. We've got to embrace it and make sure we're fit for that future.
So, thank you very much indeed. We'll move on to Paul Morris, who's Head of Government Affairs at Vodafone. We're very grateful to him for not only inspiring but also supporting this event. Paul.
Hi, and I know there's industry colleagues around the room, so it'll be interesting to get their views in the Q&A. I mean, I think from our perspective, if we look at where we've come from in the past 5 years, it's really extraordinary, the expansion of our use of the internet, both obviously at home but also on the move. And I think some progress has been made to build the networks that can support that, but we've clearly got quite a long way to go. And if I break this down, I think we've got coverage challenges, which I think we have some answers to, and then we've got a capacity challenge, i.e. once you get your signal or you get your connection at home, is it going to be enough in the future? And I think on the coverage side, at least on the mobile side, I think we will get there. We've got ambitions to deliver to 98% of the population. That's mirrored pretty much by the industry as a whole. We obviously just did a deal last year with the government to cover 90% voice and geographical coverage as well, and we'll hit roughly those numbers for data. So listen, on the coverage side, I think it will happen. I mean, there will still be areas where we'll have to look at working in partnership with government. That isn't, I mean, I think we have to come up with a better and smarter programme than the MIP project, but equally, you know, partnership is an approach that we should be thinking about. And you know, this is in spite of many years of discussion with the government around policy reform that would bring us up to date and recognise that digital infrastructure indeed is as important as other physical infrastructure, and needs to basically have an environment in which, when you're trying to build masts or roll out fibre, that you need to have an environment that welcomes that and helps that process rather than stands right in the way. And we're still waiting really for the reforms around planning and property law and other areas which we can talk to you endlessly about. I mean, just to give you an example, and this is an industry example, a couple of stats I think to bring it alive. We have not built the network we should have built in terms of mast size for the country. We built the one that the regulations allow. That means we're around 10 metres shorter than a European average on mobile internet, i.e. largely on 3G sites, which are basically mobile internet. That means there's up to 150% less coverage per mast. And so you're sort of getting where we are. We need to get to a point where we recognise this infrastructure is important and make sure the regulatory environment is supporting that. And to be honest, the government have been slow. I mean, I think they've recognised that coverage is important, as we all have. They've been a little bit slow to introduce the changes that we need, and that's when they've actually agreed with us. So I mean, we have got a bit of a challenge about getting things out of the sausage machine. And then, frankly, when we switch to capacity, this is probably where we have our biggest concern as a business. Just to be clear, people probably haven't kept up with us as the business we are today. So we're both a fixed and mobile business. We bought Cable and Wireless about 3 years ago. So we bought a fibre network on the back of that acquisition. But ultimately, all of us, with the least extent with Virgin, I know in the room, but also even Virgin to some extent, all of us are using the Openreach network to deliver our network. So that basically means that we don't have our own contiguous network. We have to use BT to deliver our services. And that basically means we're reliant on one company pretty much, and the success of one company to deliver the connections to the internet going forward. And then I think you have to ask yourself the question whether we are happy with that scenario, but also actually whether it's delivering today. And I think if we look at three important areas that I think we need to focus on that question, quality of service, investment and innovation. So quality of service today it's just not working. I mean, that's the problem. I mean, I think even if you're a customer at home, you might have experienced this. Don't think it's much better for a large company like Vodafone, because we don't really have anywhere else to go. I mean, we have to connect. Frankly, BT probably has the only fibre in the ground, that we need that fibre for our masts. And so if we look at it, you know, the figure that we have as an industry figure, and it's an Ofcom figure, is that BT currently is hitting a 45% delivery rate on their fibre connections, their Ethernet connections, which are fibre connections, 45%. They're reporting a 95% success rate. So that's concerned the regulator so much they're looking at it. And the reason is that they're allowed to stop the clock, basically, and use, you know, so basically, you know, they can say that it's raining, or, you know, I forgot my wellies, or whatever, right? So there are reasons, and some of that is legitimate, but the reality is the difference is amazing, and that's an industry figure. And then if I look specifically at a program that we're trying to launch, which is something called Rural Open Shore Signal. Basically, it's boxes that plug into a broadband connection of more than 4 megabytes and deliver a mobile signal to rural communities. Jesse's got one in his patch, and we're trying to do 100 more. So we made 65 orders to OpenReach, of which we've had 73 problems. So, you know, on a quality of service, there is a problem here, and a problem that needs to be addressed. On investment, we're just not sure that the money that we pay to use the OpenReach network. And, you know, everyone, so the OpenReach network makes money. We just don't think enough of that money is going back into investment into that network. And it's being diverted into other markets, frankly. It's being diverted into football rights, and it's been more recently with attempts to acquire EE, which is the largest mobile provider. So we want to see more of that money go back into that network to make sure that network's fit for the future. And then on innovation, you know, I mean, the point I think we've got is that if we don't get fibre closer to the home, or even indeed to the individual on the move, i.e. the mast, we've got a real problem, because you know, that's what we need. Certainly on the mobile internet side, you know, if we're going to have superfast, 4G is more reliant on fibre connections to our masts than any other technology before. You know, and the capacity, what we see, and we've seen this in London, is, you know, the predictions are it's going to raise by at least 6 times by 2018, and that's probably right. I mean, we're seeing this problem in London where, you know, it's not so much if you've got a signal, it's the amount of people want to use it. As soon as people get it, they really want to use it a lot, and we all experience that in our lives. And I think the reality there is we haven't really got a plan to deal with that. We've got a plan to probably enhance what's already there, but that doesn't cover those folk who've got nothing, or indeed don't have enough today. So there is an opportunity, and we've mentioned already, Ofcom are doing a strategic review. They haven't done one for 10 years. The last one set up OpenReach, which is in a jargon called functional separation. So we think there's 2 things that need to happen. Firstly, we need to action now, as Sarah says. So we need to basically make sure that there's enough and appropriate access to the OpenReach network that allow us to control and run our network better. That's paid access, but paid at the right price. So that's access to the ducts, i.e. that are in the ground already, access to dark fibre, i.e. that's the fibre that's not being used, because it's, you know, paid but at the right price. That can happen straight away under the current regulatory system. And then we must ensure that we have a full review on whether actually the way forward is to free up or separate OpenReach from BT, which frankly is what we've done with all other infrastructure. More traditional infrastructure, if you think about the model, in the UK, we haven't got this where we've got the monopoly supplier owning the network. We've taken that decision in other markets. So at the very minimum, we think, and I know others in the industry do as well, is that we've got one opportunity to really look at this, make sure that that the right decision is made, and we think that's best achieved by an early referral by Ofcom to the Competition and Markets Authority to have a proper, roots and branch look at it, and then we'll live with that decision. But we need to make sure that we've looked at this in the round and made the right decision for the country. Because frankly, if we can't wait another 10 years, we've got a one-off opportunity, and that is now. So, I think we've got an opportunity. It depends whether we take it. That is the question. Thanks.
Paul, the recent comments by Ed Vasey in support of BT and OpenReach, they're not exactly helpful to the case that you're just making.
Well, I mean, I think the truth of it is obviously the regulator is supposed to be independent, so we assume that the government is allowing the regulator to make a full and independent decision.
I think that's passing the buck. Jesse Norman is MP for Hereford and Herefordshire South since 2010, former member of the Treasury Select Committee, and now, since May, elected chair of the DCMS Select Committee. Jesse.
Well, thank you indeed, Tim, and thanks to CPS and Vodafone and all of you for coming along. I can't hope to match Paul's delicatesse in addressing some of these issues, but before we get started, can I just ask, if you are related to a telecoms company or have any other kind of industrial or personal stake in this, could you just put your hand up so I can see what the balance is between lobbyists and members of the general public? Okay, so we've got 7 or 8, that's good, thanks. It just means I can shape the comments. Actually, fewer than I thought. I didn't say make them more palatable. So let's just talk a little bit about some of this stuff. So we're running an inquiry into the universal service obligation beginning in November on my committee. So I'm not going to prejudge the outcome of that inquiry. And if any of you on either side of the, as it were, individual versus corporate divide want to submit, and I'm sure many of you will, to the inquiry, then please continue to feel free to do so. Actually, the formal deadline has passed, but we're still interested in taking evidence, and I would very much welcome that. So, just to pick up some of the very interesting things that have already been raised. Of course, we're not just talking about mobile, we are talking about mobile and broadband. We're not just talking about broadband, we're talking about broadband and mobile, and there are digital hotspots in the country which do not have adequate access to either of those things, actually. Obviously many more on the broadband side than on the mobile side. And I think it's fair to say, regardless of what your view is of this government's policies in general, that although the record in some respects has been quite admirable of investment in the rollout of rural broadband and broadband generally, in other respects it's been short of what we would consider an ideal arrangement. I don't think anyone in the government anticipated that one company would dominate the investment process when they opened up the bidding with BDUK. I don't think anyone can look at the outcome of the mobile infrastructure project with anything other than a feeling of catastrophe, because that has been a total fiasco as far as I can see. It's and it's very much one that has affected my constituents. I mean, I cover this from a very direct personal constituency interest. Of course, in Herefordshire, we are short of mobile coverage, Paul and colleagues, and we're very short of broadband coverage, fixed line broadband coverage, and so we really do feel the absence of a mobile infrastructure project. The idea that that's been curtailed for reasons that actually, as far as I can see, are thoroughly spurious in many cases, is simply not adequate or acceptable. Now, so that's the very broadest context. What can we say about some of these things? Well, there's an interesting, just to step back from the argument, there's an interesting argument about what are the standards you should apply in this context. And I think Matt was absolutely right in talking about a universal type right to levels of access. I don't think anyone can deny that, but that in itself raises a further question as to whether you're talking about the kind of way we think about utility infrastructure with electricity, where broadly speaking...
Very, very good mobile company.
Pleased to see that the Radisson Edwardian isn't a not spot.
It will be now.
Well, thanks. What is the right way to think? Should we think of broadband infrastructure like electricity, where everyone has it, or like a regular fixed line telephone, or should it be more like water, where not everyone has it, but you sometimes have to get your own water, you dig your own borehole, but possibly you're helped to dig that borehole, using the metaphor, with government support. And where do you draw that balance, and what's the correct trade-off between the limitless amount of money that could be consumed by pushing fibre into the premise, in every premise in the country, domestic and business, and using that money in the most effective possible way? And I think the way is completely open to innovative policy solutions that start to address some of these things. And I rather share Matt's view that what people really want is the ability to plan, especially on the business side, because it's very easy to talk about these things just as residents and think in terms of rural residents, but it's also crucial in terms of business. And that's really my second point, which is we're not just talking about a right to access, to share the quality of the cultural and business as it were, interactions that people normally get online, or indeed telemedicine, a vital thing in rural areas. We're talking about whether the rural areas could in some sense have themselves a kind of step forward in their own, a significant step forward in their own economies. In Herefordshire, we're very much promoting the idea of a specialist technology and engineering university based in the city of Hereford, keying off some of the work that happens in the county in special forces and defence and intelligence, security and other areas like that. That's inconceivable if you haven't got a very, very high functioning broadband connectivity, because those services are, and that education is very, very consumptive of those particular kind of connectivity. So, but if you have that, then you have a potential project that is as consequential for my county as the building of Hereford Cathedral was in the 9th, 10th, 11th, 15th, 17th century. I just hope it will happen slightly faster than the movement from the Norman settlement to the 19th century reconstruction of one entire side of the cathedral. So that's one thing. I do think one other thing we should think about, though, is so the question we're going to be focusing on, in a way, in the committee to start off with, is not just what should a universal service obligation be, but what do we mean by that? And that's something, again, I would encourage anyone who wishes to submit to think about. And I personally am deeply uncomfortable, I think I can say this without any fear of prejudice in the committee, with a USO that's just set at 5 megabits or 5 to 10 megabits. It's got to be set at a level that's high enough to give rural areas a genuine chance to compete with their urban counterparts. And it's got to be set at a level that is flexible enough to be upgradable as technology changes. And therefore it can't just be a different kind of digital divide, which is we're going to give you a technology that gets you so far, but you have to throw it away after a period of time, or you can't use it, or you can't upgrade it at relatively easy cost. Having said that, I do think there are lots of potential options that are open and available, and there's really no reason why. The one thing I would say is it's going to require more money, and more public money, and we should be clear about that. And the fact that the BBC has had its top slice taken away by the government without any evidence as to where the DCMS is going to provide the additional funding for future generations of broadband investment is disquieting. And I've raised it with the Secretary of State, and I think we'll continue to raise that with the Secretary of State, because rural areas are going to require enough public investment alongside the industry investment to make sure that that connectivity occurs. After all, many of these people did not move out of the great cities into these areas. They grew up there, and therefore that right is one that they've never had the option to change in their own lives, and their families' lives and their well-being are key to where they live, and we should be supporting them and helping them to live those lives as successfully and well as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jesse. Before opening this up to the floor, I just want to ask the panel one question, and Matt, in particular, before we has to move on. And putting this into a political context, it's obviously not unreasonable to assume that there may be a period of at least 10 years of Conservative majority government. In that light, then there can be no political excuse for failure in an area where there is such unanimity for action. But what should be the realistic targets to which the government can be held to account in improving broadband? In other words, by what date should we see universal access? At what speed should that access be? And what proportion of coverage should there be?
I think on the one hand, I'm going to start off by saying the question's the wrong question, if you like. However, that should stop me answering it. Which is, I think we get hung up on speed, because if we set a 24 megabits per second here, the universal service obligation, on the one hand there'll be momentary ecstasy, and then when we get to 24 and discover that actually we should have set it at 240, people will be very, very grumpy. So it's about, you've got to take the same approach that Bazalgette took to Seward, which is sort of think of what the biggest you think it's going to be is, and then multiply it by 4 or 5 or 10 or whatever. So when should we have the broadband service that people need and the capacity that will be able to cope with their future needs is the question that we need to be answering. Now, the problem with that is, well, therefore, everyone should get a 1 gig connection to their doorstep by 2025, let's say. That's obviously not going to happen, which makes me think, ultimately, the solution to this stuff is much more likely to be 5G and wireless, where at the end of the day, with the appropriate fibre going to where it needs to be for the backhaul, than it is going to be every house gets a fibre to the cabinet connection of 12 megabits a second by 2019 or whatever. So I think what we've got to do is try and, so far as we possibly can, to look at the future need and the future technology and not inadvertently prescribe something that would be out of date before we'd even finish building.
Thank you. Paul, what would you like to see?
Well, so I mean, we've got to get the market right, and we've got to create a vehicle for investment, which we don't have today. We're too focused on one company's investment plans, which you know you could argue on not doing things. So clearly, that's one point: is you create a vehicle in which we can all invest, and also could attract its own investment. I mean, there's plenty of examples of the other infrastructure providers where the network itself has been perfectly healthy. And then I think you do then get into the market of having different technologies, as Knox left. But you know, wireless is underplayed. You know, mobile internet is also underplayed in rural areas and should be used more. But the trouble is, in the current model, you know, there are other problems with it. We can talk about that as an audience. But actually, the real problem is that you end up shifting all your money over to your competitor, if you like, to try and deliver a solution. Because to deliver the speeds, you'd have to take a huge chunk of backhaul, which is this broadband connection. So it's almost like, you know, you get the market right, and then you can start using other solutions. You don't get the market right, we get what we have today.
Thank you. Questions? Lady here.
Sue, just from the Advertising Association, is there a case to be made for this being part of Lord Adonis's new National Infrastructure Commission, which looks like it's just focusing on physical infrastructure, but I think should also focus on digital infrastructure?
I absolutely agree with you. I think when we had the government's infrastructure bill a few years ago, you know, it was focusing on the physical infrastructure. You know, as we were saying, 12% of our GDP is now generated through the internet, so we need to treat the internet infrastructure as part of the physical infrastructure. So it's absolutely key to be with Lord Adonis's.
At the moment, it's not. Doesn't seem to be part of it.
Yeah, I'm not so persuaded about that. For two reasons. One is because there's a vast amount of existing transport infrastructure which needs to be considered, managed and driven forward, and that I think will be the first priority given Lord Adonis's interests and where the Chancellor is trying to drive it. And therefore we don't want a system which has the effect of pushing this in second place, behind, as it were, another category of investment. And the second is because the kinds of investment made, this is not a big government investment directly in a piece of kit, and it's not a big government piece of commissioning directly into a piece of kit. It's setting the framework, as Paul said, for a set of market interventions, often working with local government in other ways. And so I'm not sure that the actual nature of the procurement really fits it for that kind of national infrastructure. On the other hand, I'm not arguing against myself, but just reminding ourselves that there's every bit as much a sense in which a piece of investment is stuff going in the ground or on the ground. I mean, there's, you know, that it's certainly an infrastructure investment in that sense.
Thank you. Jonathan here.
Yeah. So there was both Paul. Oh, thank you. So both Paul and Matt mentioned wireless and I think you said 5G. Paul, what do you think the ratio of the problem is between data and voice?
It will all be data driven. Voice is 128 kilobytes, right? You can make a call, right? And to be really clear, I mean, the technology is coming in. I mean, we already do. Technology means you can plug into a broadband. It's called femto cells, and increasingly you'll be using your Wi-Fi connection. So it actually will be on the move data. I think it's the real challenge, and that's where you need the fat pipes for.
Lady.
My name is Charles Howarth and I'm Shadow Minister for the Environment and Sustainability from the Welsh Assembly. So I'm going to talk about rural Wales and particularly North Wales, which is my region. I actually think if you think back, we have the agricultural revolution, we have the industrial revolution. Britain led on both of those. We now have the digital revolution, and we began that too. But if we don't get our act together, we will give up that position, I think. And I think we need an equivalent to the national grid, but delivering us fibre optic, direct to everybody who needs it. I think we need an honest appraisal of what is actually going on out there, because I'm constantly meeting people who tell me they do not have the superfast Cymru broadband that they're being promised. The prosperity of rural communities is at stake. We now know that businesses do not have to be location specific. They can choose where they want to be. And as long as they have access to this technology, they can trade with the world. And particularly the younger generation appreciate this. They know Europe isn't the only game in town, and they can run a business with something they hold in their hand. I have a son in his early 30s who is doing exactly that. So I'm feeling very frustrated sitting in the Welsh Assembly being told that Superfast Cymru is absolutely great, it's meeting all its targets, and not getting the answers that I'm looking for. So I went up to Lancashire, where I originally come from, to visit something called Broadband for Rural Networks, who have connected up their 2000th property in the rural area of the Trough of Bowland, definitely a hard to reach landscape. And they've done it with fibre optics. They've done it with farmers with old 1950 roll ploughs. They now have a new one. They've managed to get the highways people on side. So they no longer have to go out at night with their roll ploughs, laying cables. And they've trained up a 65-year-old farmer's wife who I watched very expertly splicing fibre cable and taking it directly to the house. So I think, I agree with Sarah, we cannot wait. I think what we need is to really look at what's going on and acknowledge that we need our county authorities to help provide the framework in which this can happen. Because while Barn was able to raise money locally and get farmers to provide their labour and their equipment, for this to roll out in the hard-to-reach areas, we will need local authorities, perhaps with the aid of European funding, to get behind these local initiatives in these areas that do present us with some very real technical problems. I think it's all possible, and I think we should be racing ahead with it. And I will point out that Barn, you can Google it, B4RN, find out what they've been up to. 2 days before I visited them, the Americans were there. So I leave that with you as a warning.
Thank you. It might be particularly interesting to put that in the context of if there is best practice in other countries from which we should learn in terms of getting to hard-to-reach areas. Paul, maybe you would.
Well, I've also listened to Barn. I think it is exciting, and I think what we're saying there is that we need a structure that supports lots of different operators, small and large. And I think at the moment the question mark, do we have that structure? Where, and I think we would suggest that in my earlier comments that potentially a separated open reach could treat everyone equally, and I think that's what we're asking for, and that would be small and large, right? So I think that would help. I mean, particularly obviously rural Wales, rural Scotland, because of the nature of the geography, are the most challenging in that sense. So I think you're right to have a specific interest as being a Welsh politician, and you should focus really on this Ofcom review as well. And we've been having that conversation with the Welsh Government too, because I mean, at the end of the day, the status quo means you are getting worse coverage in other parts of the country, in all truth. So that's, I would encourage you to get involved in that. Examples, I think probably New Zealand is the best example of where it has worked, where separating, they basically separated their equivalent of BT. It's early days, but it's attracted investment from both the incumbent, as was the BT equivalent, but also frankly Vodafone as well. So the reality is it seems to be working in New Zealand, but like all these things, there are you can throw other countries in that have been less successful, but New Zealand seems to be a successful model so far.
Thank you. The gentleman right at the back.
Thank you. Mr. Foxwell from Sussex. Vodafone. You're looking to site share. Have you got the capacity within your mast across the country to site share with other operators. And what's a fair rent to be paying to those farmers and landowners across the country to ping your signals around? Because I've got a Vodafone mast on my land, and I'm not impressed with you. I'm seriously not impressed with you. You've created Cornerstone, if I'm right in saying. So my communications in the past with yourselves, Vodafone, you're now subbing it out to too many people that are having a bite of the cherry, and I am that close, very close, in telling Vodafone to get off my farm. So perhaps we can have a chat afterwards to better communicate with farmers and landowners across the country that supply the service to put your mast on to improve the better service that we all need. Thank you.
Do you want to briefly?
Well, let's have a chat afterwards. I mean, what we basically got is a scenario where the industry itself is sharing sites more. I mean, effectively, there's two sort of sets of infrastructure, if you like, at the moment. But the reality is, I have to say, and it will be challenging for you, is that. Well, no, hang on. I mean, let's look at this, right? So we pay a lot higher rent costs as an industry than other infrastructure providers. Well, I mean, I can send you a Deloitte report which we commissioned on this because there's been a big debate in government about it, right? And so the facts say, if you look at the numbers across the industry, that we do pay a lot, thousands and thousands of pounds in comparison to a couple of £100 if you look at, say, electricity payment, right? So the challenge there isn't to say that we should be like water or electricity, but it is to say that if we want to have a universal network, which I think everyone has basically not said on this panel, but also in the audience, then something has to give. It's not the old days where you turned your phone on once a week, it was in your bag, the network only made phone calls. It is different now. We need many more sites, both we need small sites in cities and larger masts in the countryside. But without that, we can't deliver the coverage. So that's the reality. Clearly, the reality is we may not be doing with your particular example, maybe there's things we can do. But that is the general trend that we need to tackle and we need to decide on as a country. Otherwise, we will not get the coverage because you can't do both, right? But let's talk about your initiative later, right?
Some other questions. Gentleman here in Glasgow.
Philip Virgo, Conservative Technology Forum, but also a shareholder in B4RN. And I would make the point that the Women's Institute courses on fibre splicing are in fact exactly the same City and Guilds course that the BT engineers do on fibre splicing. And they use equipment from the main manufacturers, videos, the rest of it to do it. And they describe basically setting up community fibre as laying a wide area network, office standard, but in a hostile environment. And the biggest hostility is not the fact it has to survive wind, storms, lightning strikes, things of that kind. But in fact the biggest and occasionally when you're building it you have to dynamite through granite and things of that kind. Farmers are actually used to that in rural areas. The biggest hostility is political, and political at every level. And one of the issues is guidance for local communities as to the choices they've actually got. Not simply the misinformation that they get from BT as though you have no choice, it's this or nothing, but realistic guidance on the choices they've got. Now I'm floating the idea via Conservative Technology Forum of a broadband voucher, a community voucher scheme, which is to enable communities to do surveys of demand and supply. Supply what is actually currently available. And that means not what's promised, but what BT can actually delivers to the area, and what others can deliver to the area. That means satellite, wireless, the rest of it. And on supply, and on demand, who actually wants what, and who's willing to pay a premium price for what? The country house hotels, the remote pubs who want Wi-Fi connections and so on. Because one of the issues is everybody claims BT is lying about what they can do and what have you. BT is staffed ultimately they have this difference between their chief engineer's model and what they actually find. Chief engineer's model is based on terribly conservative telecoms engineers knowing what they can do, building every fudge factor and safety factor into it. When they get to the ground, they discover what they've actually got. Usually they can do more for less, and when they end up doing more for less, it's not because they're devious, it's because they're telecoms engineers. And one of the issues is how to actually have a regime that lives with the way that telecoms engineers actually behave, not just what the lobbyists think they're doing, because there's a massive great gap. We're dealing with human beings at every level, and we do need to have processes that recognise that we're dealing with humans, not just technology.
Sarah, is that something that the Project Side Alliance wants to be involved with?
I mean, obviously, Philip and I have had a long chat about that, and we are very supportive of using smaller companies to deliver technology. We do feel that one size fits all with BT is not working, and we need to have that greater flexibility. And comes back to the point Matt was making about having transparency to know where we are not delivering on broadband, so other companies can come in and offer communities a real choice and a real opportunity to deliver their own broadband. And I think this should only be celebrated and pushed forward. And I think this government, if you were saying, with Corbyn coming in, got 10 years potentially with Conservative government, it should be a key priority for them to offer greater flexibility and communities a greater choice.
Yeah, just to pick up a couple of points that have been raised in the last few questions, if I may. I'm very grateful for the last questioner's comments. I think community voucher scheme is a very interesting idea, potentially. I think we're at the very start of intelligent ways of thinking about policy solutions. Key thing is to define what the problem is, and bear in mind some of the things that Paul was mentioning about market structure and investment incentives, and then to try to tie those things together. So on that, you do by implication raise a couple of interesting questions that relate to what the lady from the Welsh Government said. Because, of course, it's one thing to say we want a national grid here, but actually there is a tension between that and local procurement.
Yes, indeed.
It may be true that the biggest obstacles are political, but one of the reasons why they will exist is over really irritating things like who's responsible for it when it goes wrong, who maintains it when it falls over, when service levels are much less than advertised, how that gets addressed. And those things are a kind of health and safety routine that the politicians and political circumstances have to kind of address. Now, that's not to say there aren't really interesting models that can be used in the world elsewhere. It's simply that we have to understand that there's a balance. And in Herefordshire, we looked at some of these alternative models, and the council, which has been in many ways rather good on this, took the view that it would be better to run it in collaboration with Gloucestershire and the Fastershire project, and that's been a judgment they've made. They may be right, they may be wrong. They're politically accountable for it in a way the local community never quite will be politically accountable for it if it's organised in that purely disaggregated way. Apropos, a couple of other things we mentioned. Speed, yeah, the numbers, speed isn't everything, as Matt said, and the numbers do get fudged. What's going to keep us at the forefront of a digital revolution is two things. One is access, but that's not really the power. That's really about equity and rural regeneration and all the other things we've been talking about. The thing that's going to keep us at the forefront of a digital revolution is the services that our companies develop. And some of those inevitably, the vast majority of those inevitably in human history will be based, if history is any, will be based on clusters within cities. But there's absolutely no reason why you can't have virtual clusters, including businesses in the countryside and in rural areas. But it's that service provision that's going to drive take-up and that's going to drive our own success nationally in this industry. Final thing, on BT, look, I don't have a brief either for or against BT, right? And I think it is quite important to note that the breakup of BT, if that's what we contemplated, is something that is entirely different in terms of scale to ones that have been done, for example, in New Zealand. It's a much, much bigger enterprise. I don't know the details, but we can be rationally certain that it would involve an enormous amount of time and effort to ensure the separation that's required. So there's a genuine argument, a genuine question as to whether or not that's the correct way to go. And that's one reason why I would respectfully disagree with Paul about expediting the Ofcom review. I think Ofcom got to take all the decision the time they need, they've got to come to a decision, and then if it gets referred to the CMA, it gets referred to the CMA, and other terms to be determined or not. But I would not be in favour of expediting that. I think they've got to give it the proper once over, because it's a very, very big decision. And of course, as we know, it's not just a big decision in terms of what the implications for BT and its business and its shareholders' interests and the potential litigation that come out of that, but it's also a huge issue in terms of how you anticipate the market structure developing from a newly reconfigured set of Openreach, what incentives would then lie, the model from functional separation to different forms of separation, how those will interact. There's enormous issues, and Ofcom is going to have to get some of its head around some of those things to quite a high degree before it can make a sensible decision as to whether to refer. It seems to me, I'm not an expert on this, but that would be my judgment.
Yeah, listen, what we've got to do is make sure that we've looked at everything in the round and come to the right decision, and that is not to foreclose early on all options. The submission, the Ofcom strategic review document has got 4 options in it. One of them is structural separation. We clearly need to do, as I say, look at the whole in and around basically. And for us, we think that the CMA referral, is the best way of achieving that full investigation, which is what I mean. But you're right. I think we just need to make sure we make the right decision. We shouldn't be making an early decision, in January, we think, to exclude structural separation.
Thank you. We'll just take a couple of last questions. The gentleman here and the gentleman in the back.
Hi, I'm Pete Farmer. I'm here with Philip at the Conservative Technology Forum. I also work with the industry, a company called Gamma, and I'm director of the Telecoms Trade Association. So I've been to a few of these sort of events over the last 2 days, and I've heard a lot of arguments for the structural separation of Openreach. However, if you think about it, if you separate the ineffectively regulated, badly performing monopoly from the mothership, you still have an ineffectively regulated, badly performing monopoly as a solution in itself. And there's lots of good examples of where things have gone right, National Grid, New Zealand, but also we can all think of Railtrack as a counterfactual. So what I'd like to hear is, other than just structural separation as a means to the end, what do the panellists think that the overlay on that newly formed monopoly should be to deliver the outcomes?
Look, you're right. Clearly it wouldn't be optimum to have carry on with the failures of today. I think we'd have to hope that an organisation that is focused solely on building a network and delivering to its customers, all its customers, would be more focused than today. And then clearly regulation will continue to play a part. The quality of service and other regulation that's in play would continue to play a part. But I think it's the dynamics. What we know is that if there's more competition in a sense of serving your customers, if you like, that has proven to work well in other markets. So I think that's where we think those improvements would come. But you're absolutely right. We're talking about an organisation that's struggling to deliver, and we need to make sure that organisation delivers. And we just can't quite see that over the last what are we talking now? 10 years, it's still struggled, right? Why is the next 10 years going to be different unless we take a fairly we at least look at what a fairly radical approach, that says that today isn't delivering, we need to go somewhere else. So, it's all right for the debate, but that's part of the debate that we need to have now, and you're right.
Thank you. Perhaps we'll take the final question.
Hi, Councillor Johnny Bucknell. I live in Camden, which is a couple of miles from the centre of London. And I'm amazed that my broadband on Sunday night was just sort of dipping in and out like a developing country's water supply. The taps go off. I think it's just crazy. I had read somewhere, and I don't know whether you tell me whether this is right or wrong, that the government can't put their own money into this, but anti-competitive European some sort of rules. Because I just think it is a national disgrace. I mean, when I go to the countryside, there's plenty of areas where my mobile phone doesn't work. I hate the concept of high-speed rail. I think we need high-speed broadband, not high-speed rail. Surely the government should make a radical intervention to get the whole country up to scratch, because otherwise you've got this north-south divide, you know, where London is apparently the centre of the sort of, you know, high-tech of the country. And, you know, I think the Northern Powerhouse is a great idea to take the pressure off us, because if we don't have broadband throughout the country, everyone just piles into London.
Thank you. I'll ask all the panellists to say a few final words and to address those two very pertinent questions, but also I'd like to ask, to go back to my original question, how optimistic are you in terms of actually imagining yourselves in 2024 and where the UK's connectivity will be by then? Sarah, would you?
Starting on the state aid rules, that you are correct, the government can't put their own money back into delivering broadband market, so we are slightly stuck in this position of having the BDUK rollout, and we are where we are on that until we have a government that's brave enough to say, let's have a wholesale review and look at our broadband policy. So that's where we are. I mean, we haven't got Daisy here who might tell us something different on how he feels about that. I totally agree with your points about having broadband for the whole country. We've always said, you know, forget all this high speed too, let's get us on high speed broadband, because, you know, we've had a lot of negative stories today about broadband, but, you know, let's remember that the UK is leading the way on take-up on broadband, on business engaging in the internet. You know, South Korea's at 8%, and it goes further and further down. So we should be rightly proud that as a country, we are making the most of it. And with that drive and innovation to put all our business online, we need to take that drive and innovation to roll out our broadband as well. So I'm very much pro, you know, getting down to smaller businesses, giving community choices, and having more local action rather than relying on perhaps an outdated monopoly delivering our broadband connectivity.
And where will we be in 2024?
I don't think we'll be much further forward.
Be positive.
Yeah, we will be.
If the alternative, if the choice was between a BT-owned second-rate monopoly and a non-BT-owned second-rate monopoly, then there wouldn't be a strong case for separation. So I take it that that's not the question, and therefore different questions will be asked. What will those be? Well, they will have to do with all the issues we've mentioned, but one of the issues they will have to do with, which hasn't been really flagged up, is what the total investment will be, and whether that will go up as between, as it were, the investment that BT would make, as it were, in itself through Openreach, if it were very different, how much Openreach would separately, and how much the mobile companies and other users of Openreach services would make. And there are big issues about industry model as to whether you're moving to a dark fibre type model for usage or whether you're allowing more value to reside elsewhere in the value chain. So that's why this is such a fiddly and difficult area. Now, I think I'm right in saying, and many people would argue, that structural separation has not been a failure. In fact, in many ways, it's been rather a success. So I don't think we should be beating ourselves up for the experience of the last 10 years, but we clearly are getting to a point where expectations on the business side and on the consumer side are ramping up very quickly, and that creates a public urgency and a need to really, not just to think hard, but to act. Now, a couple more things. The gentleman who mentioned Camden's absolutely right, because, of course, this absence of quality of signal, and it is quality of signal as much as speed, reliability of signal, is a function not merely of whether you have access to a particular technology, but of how many other people are using the signal at a particular moment. And that, therefore, there's a continuously escalating need for additional investment in areas of high usage. The good news is, those areas of high usage tend to be commercially viable in the first place, and therefore we ought to be able to allow the market, broadly speaking, to do its job. And now we have to change, maybe we have to change incentives, but that's a slightly different question, the question how you get a signal somewhere so the person can be regarded as included in the system at all. I would say it's very easy to talk about radical interventions, but look, I'm a Burkean conservative, right? I don't believe in radicalism. I think the French Revolution was a disaster. If you don't believe me, go and read some of the history of the French Revolution. and therefore I don't like radical interventions. And the question that the radical intervention idea automatically raises is how? And it's dead easy to think of ways in which government can make the situation a lot worse, and really quite hard to think of ways in which it could make it a lot better. And that's the challenge we face. How optimistic am I? The answer is I'm extremely optimistic, but that's because I'm a hopeless Pollyanna about the future. I do think that we'll be much better advanced in 10 years' time, but nowhere near as far ahead as we'd like to be, and therefore grumbling just as much as we are now. Paul.
So I think if some of the measures that we've discussed today happen, let's be right, and Sarah's right, is we have embraced digital. I can't see that changing. You know, we all travel abroad, most of us, I guess, and you see the difference in some countries compared to us. And that can have a fundamentally good impact on our working and social lives. I think if treated in the right way, you know, it can make us more productive, but also allow us to live our lives whilst at work in a way that suits us. It can help us be, you know, connect with more people across the world and in our families. So basically, it's all positive, as long as we can get the raw material to the person. And that has to be, you know, nearly as damn it as all of us, whether you live in a rural location or in Camden or anywhere else. So we've got, you know, that's the challenge. The challenge is making sure that people have the option to you know, fulfil their potential through using digital. And I think we've made a great start, but that's us making that start. I think the opportunity really is to make sure that we continue that process.
And you're optimistic?
Listen, I'm optimistic as long as we don't do what we sometimes do in this country, which is assume that the status quo is the only way to do it because it's too hard to change.
Can I thank all of you in the audience for participating and asking such incisive questions, but can I also ask you to, for vote of that thanks to all the members of the panel.
My pleasure. You can take something to your little bar.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to That's all very useful.
Yeah.